My daughter stood before our family and said I was losing my mind, too senile to live alone. She wanted me locked in a nursing home, in the very house I built with my own hands. The relatives nodded in pity. My son-in-law hid a smile, and I felt the sting of betrayal cut deeper than age itself. But they had forgotten one thing: this house remembers everything, and tonight it would speak for me. Before I take you deeper into this story, take a moment to sit back, breathe, maybe sip some water. And if you enjoy gripping stories full of betrayal and twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you won't miss what comes next. When people look at this house, they see nothing more than brick and wood. But when I look, I hear sounds, smell, scents, feel textures that belong only to memory. I hear the clang of hammers from 40 years ago echoing through unfinished rooms. I smell wet cement mixing with dust and sweat, the sharp sting of turpentine on our clothes. I feel the rough timber beams under my palms, splinters catching my skin, and Anna's hand slipping into mine, steadying me. We built this place ourselves, two young fools with more determination than money. Neighbors thought we were reckless, a couple like you. Building your own house, they laughed. But Anna just smiled, her cheeks streaked with sawdust, and said, "Every nail we drive will remind us that it's ours, no one else's." I can still hear that hammer bang. Bang, bang like a heartbeat. The house grew in rhythm with us. Walls rose, floors settled, a roof took shape overhead. And when we finally stepped back, sweating, aching, covered in grime, we looked at each other and laughed until tears rolled down our faces. It wasn't perfect. The walls weren't straight, the paint uneven, the windows drafty. But it was ours. And when Anna pressed her palm into wet cement, then nudged me to press mine beside hers, I knew we had sealed something deeper than stone. Even now, when I crouch down and fit my fingers into that hardened print, I can feel her. As though time never passed, as though her hand is still there waiting. Years later, the sounds of building were replaced by the sounds of family. Emily's laughter bouncing down the hallway, Anna's singing as she stirred soup in the kitchen, the floorboards creaking under late-night footsteps. The air always smelled of something warm, bread-baking, roses blooming in the garden, wood smoke curling from the fireplace. But those sounds grew quieter after Anna fell ill. The laughter dimmed. The smells turned sterile, antiseptic wipes, hospital sheets, medicine bottles. The only sound was the soft rasp of her breath in the half-light of the bedroom. I remember one night in particular. The rain was falling against the windows, the room lit only by the small lamp beside her bed, the smell of rain mixed with the bitter tang of pills on the nightstand. Her hand, so light and frail, trembled in mine. "Promise me," she whispered. I leaned close. "Anything. Keep the house. Don't let it go. It's where we belong." "I promise." "And Emily," she said, her eyes struggling to stay open, "protect her, even when I can't." "I will," I told her. My voice broke, but I forced the words out. "I will." Her hand squeezed mine weakly, then loosened. The rain filled the silence, and by morning, she was gone. That promise has defined every breath since. To protect the house, to protect Emily. But now those vows collide like storms. To save one, I must stand against the other. When Emily visits now, she doesn't smell of roses or fresh laundry like Anna used to. She smells of perfume, too sharp, ambition too strong. She fusses over me, arranging my pills, clucking her tongue, asking questions, with a voice soaked in false concern. "Dad, did you remember to turn off the stove yesterday? You forget sometimes. Dad, these stairs are dangerous. You should think about safer living arrangements." Mark stands behind her, arms crossed, eyes wandering across the beams and cabinets. He talks about market value, about subdivisions, about how a place like this could sell for a fortune. They smile at me, but I can feel the hunger behind their teeth. "Let me ask you something. If it were your child standing in your kitchen and pretending to care while secretly planning your removal, what would you do? Would you confront them head on, or would you wait and gather proof? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your thoughts. I try to act the part they've written for me. The old man who nods along, forgets small things, shuffles slowly from room to room. It's easier to let them believe their play is working. But inside, I am sharper than ever. Still, their words cling to me after they leave. The living room grows too quiet. The clock ticks too loud. I sit at the kitchen table and touch the grooves where Emily once carved her initials as a child. She had been scolded for it, but Anna only laughed. "Let her mark the house," she said. "It's hers too." Now when Emily's voice fills the same kitchen, it carries no laughter, only calculation. Sometimes I wake in the middle of the night, the house wrapped in silence, so thick it feels alive. I walk the hallways barefoot listening. The floorboards groan, the pipes sigh, the wind slides under the old window frames. These are the same sounds Anna once called the house's breathing. But lately I've begun to think of them differently, not as the house breathing, but as the house whispering, warning me. I stand by the doorway where Anna and I pressed our palms into the cement decades ago. My fingers fit perfectly still. I whisper to her I kept my word. I'm still keeping it. The cement is cold, but it steadies me. When Emily and Mark visit, the contrast is unbearable. They arrive with smiles rehearsed like lines from a script. Emily sets groceries on the counter, the plastic bags rustling. Look, Dad, I brought you yogurt vegetables. You need to eat better. Her tone drips with duty, not love. Mark drifts towards the window, staring at the garden as if the roses were dollar signs. Beautiful property, he murmurs. A shame it's so much for one man. I pretend not to hear. Instead, I write later in my notebook, they circle the house like vultures. They smell inheritance, not memory. And yet the hardest part is how familiar their kindness still looks. When Emily tilts her head and says, Dad, please think about your safety. She uses the same tone she once used as a child, begging me for another bedtime story. My chest aches each time. I want to believe her. I want to see my daughter, not the stranger her greed has shaped. But the notebook doesn't lie. Neither does the camera hidden above the stove, nor the one in the stairwell. Every false smile, every careful arrangement, they are being watched. This house, the one they covet, is no longer just a home. It has become my witness. At night, I return to the garden. The roses sway in the wind petals, trembling. Their scent carries me back to evenings with Anna, her laughter, her voice, the way she would brush soil from her hands and kiss my cheek. Protect her, she said, meaning Emily. I tried, I whispered to the roses. I still am, just not in the way you imagined. The garden does not answer, but the silence feels less empty. I know the storm is coming. I see it in Emily's eyes each time she lingers on the framed deed in my study. I hear it in Mark's voice when he speaks of arrangements. I feel it in the way they try to make the relatives pity me, to shape me into the role of the feeble old man. But I'm not feeble, I'm waiting. The house and I, we are listening, we are remembering, and when the moment comes, we will speak. The past has a way of sneaking into the present. Sometimes it's the smell of rain on the wooden porch, and I remember the day we first raised the beams. Sometimes it's the creak of the stairs, and I hear Anna's voice calling me down for dinner. And sometimes it's Emily's voice, soft, trembling, innocent, and I remember the little girl she once was before greed sharpened her tongue. I still see Anna as she was in those early years when the house was nothing but skeleton beams and open sky. The air was thick with dust, the clang of hammers echoing through the valley. Hold the plank steady or you'll crush your thumb, I warned. Anna laughed, sweat streaking her face. You think I'm clumsy? Watch me. She swung the hammer down, the bang, bang, bang ringing like a drumbeat of our future. We worked until our hands blistered, until the smell of cement stuck to our skin. At night we lay on the half-finished floor, staring at the stars through the rafters, our bodies aching, our spirits alive. This house will outlast us, she whispered, once her voice carried by the wind. Only if we keep building, I teased. And only if we keep loving, she said. Those words pressed into me as firmly as the cement under our palms. Years later, when Emily was born, the house was no longer just wood and stone. It became cradle and cradle song. I remember holding her so small she barely filled the crook of my arm. Careful, Anna whispered, placing her hand over mine. She's our whole world now. Emily's cries filled the halls like music. She grew fast, marking the doorway each year, her pencil scratches climbing higher. She chased sunlight across the floorboards, giggling when dust motes sparkled in the beams. One stormy night, she crawled into our bed, her little body shivering. Daddy, I'm scared of the thunder. I wrapped my arms around her. The house is strong. It won't let the storm in. She buried her face in my chest. Promise. Promise. That word has haunted me ever since. But life is cruel in its timing. Emily was 16 when Anna fell ill. The laughter in the house faded, replaced by the steady beep of monitors, the bitter smell of medicine. I remember one evening vividly. Rain lashed against the windows. Emily stood in the doorway, her voice small. Dad, is Mom going to die? Anna, frail in bed, beckoned her closer. Come here, sweetheart. Her voice was barely a breath. Whatever happens, this house will keep you safe. Your father will keep you safe. Emily burst into tears. I don't want you to go. I'll always be here, Anna whispered, pressing Emily's hand to her chest. In the walls, in the garden, in every story your father tells you. I turned away so they wouldn't see my tears. The room smelled of damp roses from the vase by the bed of rain, pressing against the glass of endings we weren't ready to face. Anna's last night is carved into me. The lamp glowed dim, casting long shadows. Her hand trembled in mine. "Promise me," she whispered. Anything I said, my throat raw. "Keep the house. Don't let it go." "I promise." "And Emily," she swallowed her breath thin, "protect her, even when I can't." "I will," I said, forcing the words through the weight in my chest. "I will." She smiled faintly, her eyes closing. The rain kept falling as if the sky itself wept with us. By morning she was gone. For years after I lived only to keep those promises. I worked double shifts, patched old clothes, skipped meals also. Emily would never feel the absence too sharply. On her 17th birthday, I baked a cake. It collapsed in the middle, lopsided and dry, but I set candles on it anyway. She stared at the flames, her voice a whisper. "I wish Mom was here." I swallowed the ache and told her she is, always. We blew out the candles together. But somewhere between those nights and this one, something shifted. The little girl who once clung to me in storms now tilts her head and says, "Dad, you forget too much. It's not safe." The daughter who once begged for stories now whispers to her husband about selling the house. When I hear her voice now, I hear echoes of both the child who trusted me completely and the woman who schemes against me. And that dissonance, that is the deepest wound of all. In the quiet hours when the house breathes around me, memory slips in like an uninvited guest. Sometimes it comforts me, sometimes it cuts me open. I remember Emily at 8 years old sitting cross-legged on the rug with crayons scattered all around. She looked up, her cheeks smudged with color. "Daddy, do you think this house will always be ours?" I chuckled. "Of course. Why do you ask?" She shrugged, her little fingers gripping a red crayon. "Because it feels like it's alive. Like it knows us." Anna smiled from the kitchen doorway. She's right. A house is alive when you fill it with love. Back then, those words felt simple, sweet. Now, when Emily stands in the same room and says, "Dad, you forget things. You need care," the memory of her child voice collides with her adult lies. The contrast is unbearable. There were smaller moments too, fragments I can't let go of. Emily at 12 coming home from school in tears. They laughed at me, she sobbed. They said our house is crooked. I knelt down, wiping her face. "Maybe it leans a little," I admitted, "but it leans because we built it with our own hands. That makes it stronger than theirs." She sniffled. "Really?" "Really," Anna said, kissing the top of her head. "One day you'll see every crooked nail is a story." How could that same girl grow into the woman who sees the house only as money? When Anna was sick, Emily used to sit by her side holding her hand. "Mom, don't leave," she whispered one night, her tears soaking the bedsheet. Anna's voice was faint but steady. "Sweetheart, I'll always be here. Look around you. This house will carry me even when my body can't." Emily nodded, her face pressed against her mother's arm. I stood in the doorway, torn between pride and sorrow. Pride that my daughter still sought comfort in us. Sorrow that I knew the comfort wouldn't last. After Anna passed, I did everything I could to keep the promises. I kept the house alive. The roses tended the beams, oiled, the rooms filled with warmth. And I kept Emily alive in spirit, paid her tuition, drove her to interviews, covered bills she never knew I struggled to pay. Once when she thanked me, she said, "You're the strongest man I know, Dad." Those words carried me through many nights. Now they return only as echoes mocking me. The cruelest part of memory is how it plays both reels at once, the child's love and the adult's betrayal. Last week when Emily leaned across the table and said softly, "Dad, you nearly forgot your pills yesterday," I almost heard the little girl behind the words, the one who once whispered, "Promise me the thunder won't get in." But then I saw the glint in her eye, the quick glance toward Mark, and the illusion shattered. She is no longer asking for protection. She is building a case against me. Late at night, I sit with the notebook in my lap. My handwriting trembles not from age, but from anger. I write down what I see, what I hear, what I remember. Gas left hissing, pills rearranged, Emily's voice rehearsing sorrow. Then beneath it, I write in heavier strokes Anna's last words, "Protect Emily, protect the house." Two promises pulling me in opposite directions, two anchors tearing me in half. I don't know if I'm keeping them both or failing them both. Sometimes I wonder if Anna foresaw this, if she knew our daughter carried both love and danger inside her. Maybe that's why she pressed my hand so fiercely in her final hours. Maybe she knew one day I would have to choose. But I can't choose. I won't. Instead, I prepare. I remember. I wait. Because if Emily has forgotten who we were, then I must remind her. If she has forgotten what this house means, then the house itself must speak. And it will. The invitation to dinner came wrapped in sweetness, but I could taste the poison beneath. Emily called a week earlier, her voice tender, almost trembling. "Dad, let's have a family dinner. Just us, some cousins, a few neighbors. It'll be good for you." Good for me, that was the lie. By evening, the house was crowded, voices echoing in the halls Anna and I had once built with laughter. Plates clattered, wine glasses chimed, the smell of roasted chicken filled the air. Yet underneath it all was a tension so sharp I could almost hear it humming. Maya climbed onto my lap, her little arms wrapping around my neck. "Grandpa, Mommy says you're moving to a new house, with nurses. Is that true?" I kissed her hair. "No, sweetheart, I'm not going anywhere." She nodded fiercely as if sealing a pact. Children can see truth where adults only see lies. The living room had been staged, I realized, as carefully as a courtroom. Chairs arranged in a half circle, a neat stack of papers on the table, a pen waiting like a loaded gun. Emily stood by the window, her hands folded, her expression solemn. Mark hovered near the papers, his smile polite but tight. At 6:30, Emily cleared her throat. The room hushed. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice shaking just enough to sound genuine. "This is hard for me, but I have to speak. It's about my father." Dozens of eyes turned toward me. I sat still, my hands folded on my cane. Emily pressed her lips together, then looked at the crowd. "Dad has been forgetting things, dangerous things. Last month he left the stove on. Just last week he nearly mixed up his pills. We love him, but it's no longer safe for him to live alone." Mark stepped forward, smoothly taking over. "We've done our best to care for him, but we can't do it all. A nursing facility is the safest place. Doctors, nurses, full-time staff. He'll be looked after. We just need his signature." He gestured toward the stack of papers. The room filled with murmurs. Some nodded sympathy, clouding their faces. Others looked at me with pity as though I were already gone. Emily's voice broke on cue. "Please, Dad, don't be angry. We only want what's best for you." My fingers tightened around the notebook hidden under my chair. I remembered writing the entry. Gas left hissing, pills rearranged. I remembered the faint hiss of the stove, the smell of gas threading the air, Emily walking away with her phone pressed to her ear, not even glancing back. I remembered the pills, the neat rows she laid out, the missing white one, the extra blue. Her gentle hand pressing a glass of water into mine, her voice soft as silk. "Here, Dad, don't forget." I had smiled, then slipped the pill beneath my tongue and spat it into my palm when she turned away. I remembered everything. Now in this living room filled with relatives, Emily turned to me. Her voice was calm, rehearsed, but her eyes gleamed with steel. "Dad," she said, "do you remember leaving the gas on?" Silence. Dozens of eyes waited. I opened my notebook, slowly flipped to the page, and pressed my pen against the words I had written weeks ago. I did not speak. I only looked at her. The silence thickened, the tension tightened, and for the first time Emily's voice wavered. Mark stepped in quickly. "This is ridiculous. He can't even answer a simple question. That proves our point." My hand trembled, not from weakness but from fury contained. I closed the notebook. And then I spoke. "You want proof? Very well. Let's show them." I reached for the remote I had hidden beside my chair. The television blinked alive. First the kitchen. Emily leaning casually on the counter, turning the knob on the stove. The flame died. A faint hiss filled the silence. She walked away, smiling into her phone. Gasps filled the room. Second, the pills. Emily's hands arranging them neatly, then palming one, slipping it into her pocket. Her smile sweet as she turned with a glass of water. The room erupted. Whispers, gasps, muttered curses. Emily's face drained of color. "Dad, you don't understand, But I pressed play again. The screen turned black, and then their voices filled the room. "Mark, if we can show them he's slipping, no one will resist. Emily, we'll move him fast. Once he's in the house is ours." The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Emily shook her head violently. "No, this is out of context." Mark shouted, his face red. "He recorded us without permission." "That's illegal." "In my own house," I said softly. "Where you left the stove hissing. Where you tampered with my medicine. Where you rehearsed lies to bury me alive." The room had turned. The pity that once leaned toward Emily now leaned toward me. Faces that had doubted me now looked at her with shame, with anger. Aunt Lily's voice cracked through the silence. "What are those papers on the table?" Mark grabbed them quickly. "These are medical consents, for his safety." "No," I said, rising slowly to my feet. "They're shackles." At that moment, the doorbell rang. All heads turned. Cousin Jonathan hurried to answer. Ms. Patel stepped in, her coat neat, her folder clutched in her arms. She moved with the calm authority of someone who knows the law will stand behind her. "I'm here at Mr. Hale's request," she said. Emily's mouth fell open. Mark's face darkened. Ms. Patel set her folder down beside their stack of papers. The difference was stark, one flimsy one, heavy with law. As of this afternoon, she said the property has been transferred to the Hale Family Trust. Mr. Hale retains full residence until his death. Upon his passing, the house will pass directly to his granddaughter, Maya. The room erupted again. Gasps, murmurs, whispers. Maya's eyes lit up. She grabbed my hand. "Grandpa, that means you're staying, right?" I nodded. "Yes, little one, I'm staying." Emily's eyes flooded with tears. Real rehearsed. I no longer knew. Mark slammed the papers onto the table. "This isn't over. You can't cut us out. We're family." "Yes," I said, my voice heavy, and that is what makes it hurt the most. For a breathless moment, no one moved. The television's black screen held our reflections like a verdict. An old man, a daughter with wet eyes, a son-in-law coiled tight as wire, and a room full of witnesses who would never unhear what they had just heard. Mark broke first. "A chair leg scrapes. This is a performance," he snapped, stabbing a finger at Ms. Patel's folder. "He's been coached. He doesn't understand what he signed." Ms. Patel didn't flinch. Mr. Hale read every page. We reviewed each clause twice. We also recorded the signing in my office. "Paper rustle. Any attempt to force him to alter these instruments after tonight will be documented as coercion." Emily took a step forward, palms out. "Dad, please. I didn't mean to hurt you. Her voice splinters. "I'm scared. You left the gas on. You mixed your pills." I opened my notebook slow enough for everyone to notice. Soft leather creak pen click. I drew a steady line beneath the last entry and wrote, "Daughter says she's scared. Gas and pills were hers, not mine." Then I closed the book and met her eyes. "I remember," I said. A murmur rippled across the room. It wasn't loud, but it carried weight, the sound of minds changing. Mark forced a laugh that landed like metal. "You all don't see it. He's fixated. He writes everything down because he can't trust his own head." I turned a page and wrote one more line deliberately. "I write things down because truth deserves ink." Then I set the notebook on the coffee table beside the stack of forms they had prepared. The contrast obscene memory beside a muzzle. Aunt Lily folded her arms. "Enough. You staged those scenes and you know it." Emily spun toward her. "Auntie, no, it was a test. Safety drills. We were trying to prove he needed help." Ms. Patel's tone stayed almost gentle. "You were trying to prove a conclusion you decided on in advance. The recordings show intent disabling a flame while leaving fuel separating medication while presenting yourselves as caretakers. In the criminal code, we call that endangerment and fraud." Something in Emily's face cracked. "I wanted to keep him safe," she whispered, and even she seemed unconvinced. "By taking us home," I asked quietly, "by turning care into a cage." She wiped at her cheek with the heel of her hand. "You don't see how hard it's been." "Then show us the hard that isn't greed," Cousin Jonathan said. His voice shook with anger he didn't try to hide. "Because all I see is a ledger where your father is an obstacle." Mark snatched the pen from the stack with a quick, ugly motion. Pen clacks. "He still needs to sign consent for the facility. Trust or no trust, he's not safe." Ms. Patel stepped between him and the table with a small surgical movement. A soft heel shift on wood. "He is safe here, with the trust, with the recordings, and with counsel." Put the pen down. For a second I thought Mark might try to push past her. His jaw flexed, his eyes bright with a dangerous sort of calculation. Then he let the pen go. It rolled slow and stopped against my notebook. Emily looked at Maya. "Honey," she said softly, "tell Grandpa you want him somewhere with nurses. Tell him you're worried." Maya pressed her lips together. The room held its breath. Then she shook her head. "I'm worried when you make up stories." The line landed cleaner than any lawyer's sentence. Someone near the window let out an involuntary "oh." I felt both broken and mended at once. Mark tried a different angle. "Fine," he said, shrugging on a false calm. "Let's talk money. Who pays when he falls? Who pays when he leaves the gas on and blows a wall out? Who carries the liability?" "I do," I said. "And when you can't?" "Then the trust does," Ms. Patel answered. "There's a contingency fund and a neutral fiduciary. Financial decisions no longer pass through Emily or you. That was by design." Mark's stare sharpened. "You're cutting his family out." "You did that," I said, "the day you turned love into paperwork." Silence again. Glass rings faintly as someone sets it down. Emily's voice thinned to a thread. "Dad, please don't do this. We can start over. We can forget what happened." "The house won't," I said. She closed her eyes as if I'd slapped her. I leaned forward, my hands on my knees, and let my voice drop to the kind of quiet that carries. "Do you remember being 6? There was a storm. You crawled into our bed and said you were afraid the thunder would get in. I said, 'The house is strong. It won't let the storm in.'" Her eyelids fluttered. "I remember. 'This is the storm,' I said, and the house held." She looked away. Mark cleared his throat loudly, eager to re-seize the narrative. None of this changes the facts. He's 70. He's fragile. The videos prove nothing except that he gestured at Ms. Patel. Client is paranoid. Paranoia doesn't install gas where there should be flame, Ms. Patel said. Paranoia doesn't pocket pills. You can't prove it was us, he spat. I picked up the remote again. We can. I didn't play new footage. I replayed 5 seconds of the gas clip and then 5 of the pills. Tighter zoom the angles Ms. Patel had pulled during review. Emily's ring flashing as she twisted the knob. Mark's watch as he palmed the tablet. Not new facts, just the same facts seen without mercy. When the screen went black, no one argued. The refrigerator hums in the kitchen suddenly loud. I clicked the TV off, and the living room reclaimed its softness. The lamp glow. The soft patter of Maya's feet as she crossed to sit closer against my hip. Dad, Emily said finally, what do you want from me? The answer rose before I could think. Truth and distance. Her eyebrows pinched. Distance. Boundaries. Ms. Patel translated gentle, for legal and emotional safety. Emily laughed one broken sound. You want me to stay away? I want you to stop trying to fix a problem you invented to solve your own, I said. If you can visit without papers, visit. If you can call without angling for a signature, call. If not, give this house room to heal. Mark scoffed. And we just accept being cut out of his life of our future. Your future is not collateralized by my past, I said. He opened his mouth, then shut it. Something like calculation, shifting to survival. We're done here. He grabbed the stack of unsigned forms, scooping them too fast so they fanned and slipped. Paper flutters. He cursed, gathered them again. Emily didn't move. He repeated sharper. She finally stood, her hands shaking. Dad, she whispered, I never wanted it to be like this. Neither did I said, but you set the stage. She flinched. She faltered. Can I come back tomorrow without all this? I looked at her, at the woman layered over the child I once carried. If you can come as my daughter, I said. Not as my case. Mark's jaw tightened. We're leaving. He strode to the door, yanked it open. Hinges creak. Cool night air pressed into the warm room. Emily looked at Maya. Say goodbye, sweetie. Maya didn't move from my side. Good night, Mom, she said. Not unkind, not warm. Emily nodded as if she deserved it. Then she stepped through the door and was gone. The door closed with a soft, polite click that felt louder than a slam. For a few seconds, we all just listened to the clock counting the cost of time, to the soft tuck of the radiator, to a single plate shifting as someone set it on the kitchen counter. Life resuming carefully. Aunt Lily came to me and put both her hands around mine. You did right, she said. And right is rarely easy. She kissed my forehead, then turned to Ms. Patel. Thank you. Just doing my job, Mrs. Patel said. We'll file the notice of tonight's events first thing in the morning. The relatives dispersed in 2s and 3s, murmuring good nights, their shoes whispering across the rug. Footsteps fade. Cousin Jonathan closed the curtains with a soft swish. When the house had emptied to the 3 of us, Ms. Patel, myself, and Maya tucked beneath my arm, the quiet changed. It loosened. It felt like a room that had exhaled a held breath. Ms. Patel gathered her folder. I'll check in tomorrow, she said. If either of them contacts you, save the messages. Do not engage tonight, she hesitated. And, Mr. Hale, yes, you showed restraint. That matters. Restraint, I repeated and glanced at the notebook. I've had practice. She smiled, small and real, and let herself out. Door latch clicks. I turned off the television. The black glass returned our dim reflections. My hand hovered over the notebook. Instead of writing, I slid it closer to Maya. She traced the spine with one finger. Grandpa. Yes, little one. Are you going to forget? I pulled her close. No, I said. Not while the house remembers with me. She nodded as if that logic were irrefutable. Maybe it was. We sat like that while the kitchen settled and the heater sighed. Somewhere a fork chimed against porcelain. Ordinary sounds suddenly holy. Then from the porch, footsteps. Boards creak outside. A pause. A second set lighter. The doorbell did not ring. Maya stiffened. Is it Mom? I listened. The steps shifted weight uncertain, then retreated. Boards creak again, fading. The night swallowed them. It's just the wind, I lied kindly. Or a squirrel. She relaxed. I did not. I rose and walked to the door, more for ritual than fear, and turned the deadbolt. Metal clicks. The sound felt like a word spoken fluently in a language I'd forgotten I knew. Back in the living room, Maya had curled against the armrest, sleep tugging at her eyes. I tucked a blanket around her shoulders. fabric hushes. On the coffee table, the pen Mark had flung earlier lay at rest against my notebook. I picked it up, felt its cheap weight, and set it down far from the pages I trusted. Only then did I write, my voice moving into ink. They brought papers. I brought truth. The guests heard everything. The house is still on my side. I dotted the last period and listened as the sentence landed in the room. Sometimes words can be louder than any recording. From the hallway, the old clock struck 9. 9 soft chimes. In a different life, I might have flinched at the passing time. Tonight, each chime felt like a post dug into the ground, one more sign that the structure would hold. I stood, stretched the ache from my shoulder, and crossed to the window. The garden lay dark and patient. The outline of the rose bushes shifted in the breeze like a congregation murmuring blessings. Behind me, a small voice. "Grandpa." "Yes." "Do houses forgive?" I turned. Maya's eyes were open bright in the dim. "I think they do," I said. "When the people inside them do." She thought about that for a long beat, then nodded. "Okay." "Sleep," I said. "Tomorrow is for questions. Tonight is for rest." She closed her eyes, a small sigh. The night pressed its cool face to the glass. I pressed mine back, refusing to fog. Somewhere beyond the hedges, a car engine turned over, idled, then drove away. I didn't need to look to know its driver. Let distance carry them wherever consequence lives. I pulled the curtain and let the room be small again. When I sat, the chair welcomed me with the familiar complaint of old wood. Soft creak, I let the sound pass through me like a benediction. On the far wall, 3 photographs. Our wedding day, Emily at 6 with gap-toothed triumph, Maya last spring with a crown of dandelions. 3 lives, 1 house holding them. I spoke to each image in turn, a father, a husband, a grandfather, finding words that matched the man he still was. "I kept it," I said to Anna. "I'm trying," I said to Emily's child self. "I will," I said to Maya. The heater kicked on a low, steady hum, soft whir. The house answered in its language. I turned off the lamp. The dark did not erase anything. It only underlined what remained. Tomorrow there would be fallout, calls, explanations disguised as apologies, maybe even threats. But the center held. And the center was here, this chair. This child asleep on my couch. This notebook, cooling under its final sentence. This house with its long memory and patient spine. I let the quiet grow into the size of a room that had just learned it was free. Then I said to myself, and to whatever part of the night was listening, "I'm not leaving." The house kept my words the way it keeps everything. Beat. Silence. The storm broke the next night. Rain lashed against the windows, drumming on the roof like 1,000 fists. The house trembled with it, but the foundation held as it always had. I lit a single candle in the living room, its flame bending in the drafts that sneaked through the old window frames. The smell of melted wax mixed with the damp air. I placed Anna's photograph on the table, her smile frozen in time, her eyes still alive with the faith she had carried. Before me lay the black notebook, its pages heavy with ink, with proof, with pain. I opened to a clean sheet. The pen hovered, then scratched across the page. They came with papers. I answered with truth. They came with pity. I answered with memory. They came as family. They left as strangers. I stopped. The rain rattled louder, filling the pauses where my words faltered. I leaned back, closing my eyes, and for a moment I was not 70. I was 30 again. My hands raw from hammering beams, Anna's laughter echoing in the unfinished house. I was 40. Emily tugging at my sleeve, asking why roses had thorns. I was 50, standing helpless at Anna's bedside, promising things I barely understood. Now I was 70, and the promises had turned to chains. I whispered into the dim room, "Anna, I tried. God help me, I tried." The candle flickered as if answering. Or maybe it was only the wind. I rose and went to the altar in the corner, where her urn rested, framed by roses from the garden. The air smelled faintly of incense, long gone. I struck a match. Click. A thin thread of smoke curled upward as the stick caught. The scent filled the room, earthy and bitter, a reminder of temples we once visited together. I bowed my head, the flame wavering before her picture. "They wanted to put me away," I murmured. "Your daughter stood in our house and called me broken. But this house is not broken. I'm not broken." The incense hissed softly, releasing its steady smoke. Outside, thunder rolled. "Anna, you told me to protect Emily. Tonight, I could not. Tonight, I had to protect myself from her. Does that mean I failed you? Or does it mean I kept faith with the house?" No answer came. Only the rain. Only the low hum of the refrigerator. Only the tick of the clock marking the seconds I could not hold. I sat again with the notebook. My hand trembled as I wrote, "They cannot kill memory, but they have killed trust. They cannot erase the handprints in the cement, but they have erased the warmth that pressed them there." The words blurred as my eyes burned. For a long while I let the rain and the incense speak in my place. Their voices were steadier than mine. At last I turned to Anna's picture. "Do you forgive her?" I asked. The question startled even me. If Anna were here, she would say yes. She always believed love could be salvaged. She forgave me 1,000 small cruelties, forgotten anniversaries, late nights at work, harsh words in tired moments. She believed forgiveness was the glue that held a family together. But forgiveness without change is only surrender. I closed my eyes. I cannot forgive her yet. But I can remember her. The girl she was, the child she once let me hold. That memory at least I will protect. The incense burned lower, its smoke twisting like Anna's hair in the wind on that long-ago summer day. I let the house darken around me. The candle guttered, the rain softened. Still, I stayed in the silence, writing one last line. "They think age has made me weak, but tonight memory has made me stronger than I have ever been." I capped the pen, set it down, and blew out the candle. The smoke rose, curling into the rafters. In the blackness, the house whispered again. The beams creaked, the floor sighed, the walls shifted. To anyone else, it was only the groan of old timber. To me, it was Anna's voice, low and steady, "You are not alone." And for the first time in many years, I believed it. The rain had passed by morning, leaving the air damp and sharp with the smell of wet earth. I opened the front door and let the scent of roses drift in from the garden. Their petals shone with beads of water, each drop catching the gray light like glass. But peace is a fragile visitor. It never stays long. I knew Emily and Mark would return, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but their hunger was not finished. The humiliation of last night would burn them into action. I could not simply endure anymore. I had to prepare. The first step was proof. More than words, more than memory. Proof that could not be denied or twisted. I climbed the staircase slowly, my knees aching, and reached the small cabinet where I had hidden a box of tools. Inside lay a handful of devices Ms. Patel had helped me purchase: miniature cameras, pocket recorders, batteries. To any eye, they looked like ordinary gadgets, but in my hands they felt like weapons, quiet ones, sharp with truth. The first camera I mounted above the kitchen stove. Tack. The screw turned into wood with a small, satisfying bite. I tested the angle. Yes, it saw the knobs, the burners, the countertop where Emily liked to arrange my pills. The second went above the stairwell. Tack. Another click, another eye open. The lens blinked red for an instant before settling into silence, like a witness taking its oath. As I worked, the house groaned faintly around me, its old bones adjusting. To anyone else, it would sound like age. To me, it sounded like agreement. I unwrapped one of the recorders, small, disguised as an old pocket watch. The brass cover clicked shut with a soft snick. I ran my thumb over its face, imagining the conversations it would capture, voices that thought themselves private whispers, sharp with greed. I placed it on the mantel where no one would question it. Next, I slipped a tiny microphone into the hollow of an antique clock. Its pendulum ticked steadily, masking the faint whir as the device powered on. Every swing of the pendulum became a metronome for truth. At my desk, I laid out papers of my own. Not the false contracts Emily had thrust at me, but real ones, copies of the trust, Ms. Patel's notes, my handwritten logs. The pages rustled as I stacked them, the sound crisp and purposeful. Shh-kt. I slid them into a heavy envelope and tucked it beneath a drawer, false bottom. Another set I placed in the safe behind the study door. When the metal clicked shut, it felt like armor sealing over a wound. The house itself became part of the plan. I walked its rooms, touching walls, tracing beams, memorizing creaks. The floorboard by the hallway groaned low when stepped on. The one near the kitchen snapped sharply. I noted them all, rehearsing how sound would betray movement, how silence could hide me. In the garden, I planted a small motion sensor near the roses. When it activated, a faint beep confirmed the system was alive. Even the flowers Anna once tended would now stand guard. That night, I sat at my desk and opened the black notebook again. My pen scratched across the page. I am no longer only remembering. I am building. Cameras, recorders, papers. The house has new eyes. The house has new ears. When they return, it will not be me who answers them. It will be the truth itself. I underlined the last words twice. Maya visited the next day. She skipped into the study, her shoes tapping on the wooden floor. "Grandpa, what are you doing?" "Making the house stronger," I said. She giggled, not understanding. She pointed at the camera above the doorway. Is that a new light? Yes, I told her, a light that remembers. She nodded as though it made perfect sense. Good. Then it can remember for me too. Her innocence steeled me more than any plan. That evening I walked through the house one last time. Every touch of a tightened screw, every rustle of paper hidden, every click of a lock in place, it all built into a rhythm. A rhythm not of fear, but of readiness. I stood in the living room, the same place where Emily had tried to condemn me. The shadows stretched long. The air smelled faintly of dust and candle smoke from the night before. I whispered into the silence, "No more defense. Now I strike." The beams creaked above me, the house answering in its language of old wood. The house was quiet again, too quiet. I sat in the armchair, the notebook resting heavy on my lap. The cameras were hidden, the microphones set, the papers sealed away. Everything was ready. And yet when the clock struck 10, the sound rang hollow. Tock, tock, tock. Each chime carried both victory and sorrow. I had saved the house, but at what cost? I looked toward the doorway where Emily once measured her height year after year, her pencil marks climbing upward like hope itself. Those faint lines still remained, though the girl who made them seemed lost to me now. For the first time in a long while, I whispered the truth without disguise. Emily, I protected the house from you, but I couldn't protect you from yourself. The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. I rose, walked to the window, and looked out at the garden. The roses swayed in the night wind, their petals trembling, their thorns catching the moonlight. Anna once told me roses were beautiful because they defended themselves. Maybe people are the same, I murmured. Behind me, Maya stirred in her sleep on the couch, a blanket tucked around her shoulders. I watched her small chest rise and fall, steady, untroubled for now. That was enough. That was worth every scar. I returned to the notebook and wrote one final line for the night. They came with papers. I answered with truth. And this house, it still knows how to speak. I closed the book, the sound of its cover snapping shut echoing through the stillness. For a long time, I simply listened to the groan of the beams, the sigh of the floorboards, the faint hum of the refrigerator. To anyone else, just an old house creaking. To me, it was a chorus patient, watchful, alive. I whispered into the dark, "They will come again, but I am ready. The house is ready." The walls seemed to answer with a soft settling, as though shifting closer around me. And I knew this was not the end of the story, only the pause before the next chapter. Before we close, let me ask you, if you were in my place, betrayed by your own child, yet still bound by love, what would you do? Would you forgive, or would you stand as I did, even if it meant breaking the family bond? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. And please take good care of yourself wherever you are, whatever time it is. Remember, no matter how heavy life feels, your story still matters. Thank you so much for listening and spending your time here with me. If you'd like to hear more stories of betrayal and truth, don't forget to subscribe. I'll be here waiting with the next chapter.